I am ready to hear from our first guest, Mike Guardia, author of Days of Fury, Ghost Troops, and the Battle of 73 Easting. Let's listen in.
Hello, listeners. This is Sharita Knobloch, your Army Wife Network owner and commander. For this episode of Army Wife Talk Radio, we are chatting with Mike Guardia, author of Days of Fury, Ghost Troop, and the Battle of 73 Easting. Have you seen We Were Soldiers featuring Mel Gibson? The critically acclaimed movie is based on Lieutenant General Harold G. Moore's experiences in the Vietnam War, and Mike wrote the first ever biography chronicling his life entitled Hal Moore, A Soldier Once and Always. Mike himself served 6 years in the U.S. Army on active duty as an armor officer. He has twice been nominated for the Army Historical Foundation's Distinguished Book Award and is an active member in the Military Writers Society of America. Mike, welcome to Army Wife Talk Radio. Super excited to have you here today.
Rita, thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to chat because you have written multiple books, of course, about war and the heroes involved and all things armor, which is really the focus of your most recent book. And so I'm excited to learn more about that. Let's start at the very beginning of your journey. Talk about your latest book. What led you to write about the Battle of 73 Easting?
Alrighty. Well, the idea for Days of Fury grew out of an earlier book that I did called The Fires of Babylon, examining the Battle of 73 Easting through the lens of Eagle Troop. And some of your listeners out there might know that Eagle Troop was the unit that was commanded by a young Captain H.R. McMaster long before he would become the National Security Advisor in the Trump White House. And as I was going through all the data and going through all the interviews and going through all the battle reports, I found out pretty quickly that Eagle Troop's actions at 73 Easting tied in very closely with Ghost Troops. And the more I learned about Ghost Troops' actions, the more I told myself, I really can't tell the full picture of the Battle of 73 Easting unless I include something in there that has to do with Ghost Troop. And that's when I decided I was going to write Days of Fury as a companion piece to The Fires of Babylon, to really give the readers out there a full picture of what was happening and what our American troops were going through on the front lines in Desert Storm.
Yeah, it was really interesting as I read your book. It almost seems like a whole bunch of tiny stories like coming together just with like the intense research with the backstories of all of these individual soldiers that were part of Ghost Troop and the Battle of 73 Easting. It was very interesting how that all came together and really spoke to me because we're stationed at Fort Bliss right now. So 1st Armor Division, I was like, oh, armor, all the armor things. This is really cool. Well, tell us, with all that research, what was the process like for writing a book like this?
Let's see. I think the process really started out with me just writing a general outline. I was trying to piece together a few different things in my head. And from there, the first step that I took was trying to find as many veterans as I could. It's almost ironic, I think, that Facebook was an incredible tool to help me. So many of these veterans are on Facebook, and they belong to a lot of the same veteran forums that I do. And once I lined up all of the individuals who were willing to give interviews, it was an incredible experience. And once I had all of their stories down as a backdrop, then that's when I would dive into a little bit of archival research and say, okay, here is everything that the veterans have told me. Do some of the official records have to say? And I found out that even some of the official records, some of the information is actually off. And that information was incorrect only because the people who were piecing together these official histories didn't actually interview all of the people who were involved on the front lines. So there are some of those nuances that get lost to history. Once I had all that stuff together, I would just try and piece together as much of it as I could against the outline that I had made. Try to get a story that would really maintain the narrative flow and also try to keep the reader's attention.
I feel like you did a great job with that because I was so impressed with the amount of detail that was in there. I mean, this conflict didn't happen yesterday. It's been a minute, but the detail that was included with the memories of some of these veterans, the specificity of their experiences was really cool. It really felt like you were there, that the reader is there experiencing this with them. Like it's something that just happened yesterday, not, whatever it is, 3+ decades ago now. So 4 decades. Wow. Yeah, it's been a minute. What's the math? I'm not doing the math. I'm not doing time math. I'm not doing that. It's ish. Well, on that note, Mike, what could readers expect to find when they read this book?
What I wanted the readers to get out of it was just an intimate, no-holds-barred portrayal of modern warfare as told by the men who lived it. I really wanted to create an account that would give a reader a view of modern warfare from a soldier's eye view, and to see how big of an impact Desert Storm had on the current state of affairs in the Middle East. And really also to show them, to show any variety of readers that when you do send people into harm's way, these are some of the downstream effects that happen.
Is there anything that surprised you when you were doing the research for this book?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there was one particular incident, an account that happened in Chapter 7, or it might have been Chapter 8. Gosh, I don't even remember now. But it was within the battle proper. There was one particular firefight that involved one particular vehicle. And for years, it had been reported that the outcome of what happened according to items A, B, and C. But all of the surviving vehicle crewmen came out and said, well, no, the official record is actually incorrect. We were there. We saw what happened in real time. And it wasn't according to A, B, and C that it happened. It's according to X, Y, and Z. So, Mike, please, when you tell the story, please tell what actually happened. And it wasn't just the vehicle crewmen inside that vehicle that confirmed it. It was the other crewmen who were in the other tanks and Bradleys within close vicinity to that vehicle that said, yes, we saw it too, and here's what actually happened. So a big disruption of what I had interpreted as being the gospel truth really was a big shock to me. And that was an incredible motivating factor for me to want to get this story out there and want to correct that.
So kind of a side note question on that. How do you, as an author, kind of rectify those conflicting accounts?
If ever I come across something like that, I always try and put a little bit of a disclaimer in the introduction of the book. I try to reconcile any oral histories that I've gathered against what the archives already say. And I'll just say that, that wherever any of these deconflictions aren't possible, I'm going to go with the version that was remembered by a majority of the people who were there to see it in real time and actually saw it happen, since they are the ones in my mind who really have the most credibility.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. I can't imagine the process that it is about not only doing the research and weeding through this, but also interpreting it and reconciling the different accounts, different stories, and really digging to find out what is the truth and what is going to make that final cut in your account with this book or other books that you've written. And speaking of which, we mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation just a few moments ago that this book is a companion piece to The Fires of Babylon. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Sure. The Fires of Babylon is essentially telling the story of 73 Easting through the eyes of Eagle Troop. There were these armored cavalry troops that were part of the 2nd Squadron in what was then the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And for 2nd Squadron Sector, there were 2 armored cavalry troops who were fighting on the front lines, Eagle Troop on one flank, and then it was Ghost Troop on the other flank. And it was through the lens of Eagle Troop that I was showing how an armored cavalry unit was expected to fight along the lines of their classical doctrines, and how it underscored the tremendous victory that our broader armed forces had within Desert Storm, and also give a nod to the incredible transformation that our Army went through in the immediate years of the post-Vietnam era to become a high-tech professional fighting force that went to the front lines of Iraq and destroyed what was then the 4th largest army in the world, because the odds were not in our favor when we stepped across the line in Saudi Arabia. All the official estimates said there's probably going to be as many as 20,000 casualties on the first day of the ground war alone. So the fact that we fought outnumbered and won, particularly within Eagle Troop sector, really just underscored how superior training and superior motivation can really carry the day. Because Eagle Troop fought its sector of the battle within about 23 minutes or so. And within that time, the 9 M1 Abrams tanks that were part of that formation just obliterated what was essentially a big swath of an Iraqi-sized brigade without the loss of a single American life in Eagle Troop.
That's incredible. That was one of the most inspirational pieces. I mean, a lot of it within this book, just to understand the true story and the history, but how it was such a transitional and pivotal experience from coming from Vietnam, where the portrayal of the American soldier or the reception of the American soldier wasn't what it is now at all, to the instigation, the implementation of the all volunteer force in 1973. And then really us being the underdog, but just going in on very short notice and kind of, giving Saddam Hussein a run for his money, like shocking him in Kuwait to be like, hey man, we're a different force now. And I really think that started the trajectory for who we are as a military now, 3 decades later. So that was really cool. It got me pretty pumped up. And I was like, yeah, America, let's kick in some doors. Let's do this. This is great. So I was pretty excited about that part as well. Mike, I've really enjoyed our conversation so far, especially as you share about your most recent book. And it's always interesting to hear the stories that don't normally get told. And after the last several interviews I've done, I have to say I'm starting to become actually interested in military history because I understand it. And I think my husband will thank you because he tells me all the things. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. And now I'm like, hey, did you know blah, blah, blah? He's like, what have you been doing? I'm like, I'm reading our author's book. So we're going to come back and continue our conversation in just a few moments about your future projects after this quick commercial break. Listeners, if you would like to connect with Mike or check out his books, find him online, Facebook at Guardia Mike or Twitter at Mike_Guardia. And if you missed that, need to know how to spell it, no worries at all. Those outbound links will be in our show notes when this goes live over on ArmyWifeNetwork.com. Stay tuned for the rest of our interview after this quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, listeners. We are continuing our conversation with Mike Guardia, author of Days of Fury, Ghost Troop, and the Battle of 73 Easting. Let's chat about your other upcoming projects, Mike, because you are a busy and very well-versed research guy. So tell us, what do you hope readers will learn about reading this book in particular, but also engaging in your other projects?
So really what I try to capture in all of the books I write is that I really just want to get the human element down on paper. I want to try to create a factual narrative that is really based on the human element and, to give people an insight into what happened through the lens of people who were just like them, your ordinary, everyday Americans who come from unassuming backgrounds, yet reach down deep, and when the chips are down and they rise to accomplish great things. And it's really what I wanted to get across in Days of Fury. And aside from that, I'm hoping to capture a little bit more of that human spirit in 2 of the upcoming projects that I'm working on. The first one that I'm about 25 days out from finishing right now is a book called Skybreak, and it is the story of the 58th Fighter Squadron in Desert Storm. Here was an F-15 squadron that achieved more MiG kills than any other unit throughout the entire conflict. Mm-hmm. And, if you look at it from the pilot's perspective, they had a lot of the same apprehensions that a lot of our ground-based counterparts did, in that here was an American combat fighter unit who, as of now, was still untested in combat. And they were going up against the largest air force in the Middle East that was equipped with the latest and greatest of Soviet fighters, like the MiG-29. And they were going up against an air force that had 8 years of recent combat experience fighting the Iranians. So the outcome was still not as clear-cut and as preordained as we would have liked it to be, but it showed that the superior equipment, the superior training, and the superior motivation, more than anything, is what really won the day. And about the average age of an American fighter pilot in Desert Storm, only 26 years old, with 0 combat experience, and then they're going up against these Iraqi MiGs, and they're blowing these MiGs out of the sky left and right.
Wow, that's really cool. Can't wait to learn more about that in the next few weeks as it goes live and available for all of us to get our hands on. So, what other projects are you working on? Because I think you mentioned some other things. You've got a lot of irons in the fire there, which is really neat.
Sure do. All right. So let's see. So after that, I am actually going to be finishing up a biography on a gentleman named Paul Gorman. And I think some of the listeners out there might be familiar with the name in passing. Paul Gorman, he was a 1950 West Point graduate, and he decorated for valor at the Battle of Pork Chop Hill in Korea. And he went on to become the chief architect of what we now know today as the Pentagon Papers. Oh. And not only that, he assumed command of U.S. Southern Command, and that was responsible for all military operations in Latin America. And he took command of Southcom at the start of the 1980s, when we had troops in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and also when we had the intervention in Grenada.
Oh, that's super exciting. Sorry, I was also looking at your website. You have so much stuff on there, and I love it. You even write children's books. Can we side note and tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. All righty. So I never really thought that I would be a children's book author.
Yes, but a little bit different from your current genre that we're talking about, but that's really neat.
But I am a proud father of 2 wonderful daughters, and they have been an incredible source of inspiration for me. And I remember this one time, I think this was about 2015-ish, we were on the couch and we were watching some cartoon that had a Hawaiian theme with it. And it was snowing outside at the same time. And I looked outside the window, and as we were watching this Hawaiian cartoon, I thought to myself, gosh, wouldn't it be crazy if there was a snowstorm in Honolulu? And I thought about it. And then after I put my girls to bed that night, I thought to myself, you know what, that'd probably be a great idea for a children's book. And, I got out this legal pad and, just started scribbling down notes on it. And I think about 4 hours later, I had the first draft of what would become It's Snowing in Hawaii, which was my first children's book. And then after that, I couldn't shake having been bitten by the bug to do children's books. So I came out with another one. And, since I found myself really enjoying the rhyming scheme, I said, well, why not do a twist on the old classic poem, The Night Before Christmas, and make it a satire and put it against a backdrop that I think will appeal to a very wide market audience. And that's when I said, okay, well, what if Santa came to visit the troops on Christmas Eve in 1944 when they're, when they're at Bastogne. And why don't I make it a World War II Night Before Christmas? Comes to deliver, presents to the frontline troops.
All the feels with that. I'm so glad I was being a creeper and looking on your website as we were also talking, because I was like, what? Mm-hmm. Children's books and that Night Before Christmas, World War II Bastogne style sounds very, very neat. So I'm going to have to look into that for the upcoming Christmas holiday in a few months, because it'll be here before we know it. Let's be honest. Time flies. Yeah. Well, Mike, we're about to wrap up our conversation here, but I would love it if you could remind our listeners where they can go to find even more empowering information about your book.